Hope everybody's doing well. Sorry you have to see me on screen, not in person. But, I think I'm just going to get into it. Got a lot of stuff to share you all today, and just a little bit of background about the studio, myself, and everything in between. So let me go and share my screen. All right, here we go. Sharing looks good. I can see myself in the background over there, so we're good. All right, here we go. All right, so the title of the my conference is "Time is Form, Form is Time," and basically what this means is really thinking about time as an essence into the creative process as a designer. And there's a little more to that too as well. And I think as I get into this, I share how my music background and how a lot of other influences go into the work of Dia Studio, and then some other things here and there too. So just going to get into it. Let's see. If you notice, I manage a lot of Instagram feeds. There's the studio. May or may not have heard a talk from Monkey Type last year, which may or may not have been me. But that's a different story. There's my teaching, there's my dog pics, and my wine habits. So I'll continue. All right, so that was a little clip by Wayne Shorter, Danilo Perez, Brian Blade, and John Patitucci. It's the Wayne Shorter Quartet. I'm showing you that because this idea about improvisation or being in the moment of time of creating work. And if you notice how we watch those musicians play, you see that they're just totally in the moment. They don't really care. They're making crazy faces. They're just really focusing on working together as an ensemble to make something in that moment. So when I think about the creative process and this idea of there's a time, there's an input, there's the time of actually performing, and then the output, you sort of have these three stages. And to think about this, to separate this kind of thing into three components too. So really, as a designer, everything that goes into my decision making when I'm doing something creative or working with something, with typography, posters, animations, doesn't really matter. There's a lot more that's going into that decision making than just looking at the graphic design elements, like my whole life experience, how I was raised, what my interests are. Everything goes into that. And then that gives you your taste, that gives you the preference, that gives you this kind of, what I'm going to do in that moment, and puts it there. And then there's this other part, we need to take a look at things, react to the work, and, there's results of the work. So, but it's important for me to think about these things separately, because if I'm worried about what's happening before me, it's going to trip up me playing in the moment or performing in the moment. Or if I'm worried of being critical of what I'm doing, or if I'm trying to think about too much what I'm doing, it's also going to affect what that performance is. So it's good to be in this space where you're completely focused in the creative process as much as possible. So looking at this segmented out, this is how I want to share the studio's work, and gives you a bit of why we do things the way we do. So I'm going to share about the input, and then eventually talk about the output, and then what happens in the middle. So that means this is a little background. This is the studio. This is Dia. This is Marge, DigiD, Computer Boy, MP, and Beans. The real names, it's Meg, Deanna, Daniel, myself, and Layla, our dog. So that's the core studio of Dia. And to get into, even before that, is to kind of talk a bit about my background quickly, just to give the context of, what we're thinking of. So my background before anything design related is I've been playing piano since I've been super young, maybe 4 or 5 years old is when I started, and I still play almost every day up until I'm getting old. So 35 years I've been playing piano. Let's put it there. And thinking about music and thinking about jazz and thinking about these things has always been really interesting to me when I was growing up. And then simultaneously, as I got older, I got exposed to, the late 90s, looking at like snowboard, skateboard magazines, this kind of visual like culture within this kind of realm of sports is really, really fascinating to me from a design standpoint. And I didn't really know at that age that this was like graphic design. I just thought the stuff was cool. And that's something I was interested in doing when I was growing up. And then as I got older, I think it was at high school, I discovered the music of Herbie Hancock. And this record particularly was like an eye-opening moment for me. It's when I was like, hey, I talked to my parents. It's like, listen, I want to take jazz lessons. I want to learn jazz music. And then simultaneously, you see the beautiful illustration and the typography. So there's this visual thing happening side by side. And then on top of that, if I think about Wayne Shorter, for example, I was exposed to his music from Herbie Hancock, and just looking at his life as creative inspiration is so tremendous to me specifically, and how he's just, it's like all the way into the late years of his life, he's creating some of the best art possible. And this idea that this constantly learning, constantly trying new things, constantly putting himself out of his comfort zone to make art to the end of your life is really fascinating. You're not just becoming a creative director and stopping and having people do stuff with you. It's, you need to put yourself in a place of learning all the time to keep things interesting. And I think Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock are two people I could draw a tremendous amount of inspiration from creatively, even though they're not designers, just what they've done with their music. So getting into that, I'm just kind of blowing through some intro stuff. I look at the Blue Note record covers, for example. Again, the visual language is really strong typographic language. It's kind of funny to look at this. It's like, these are going to be really fun records to listen to. And then if I look at ECM record, which is a label from Germany, also great jazz catalog, but also these records don't look like they're as fun, but they're also really cool. It's almost like the art version. So it's fun to see these back and forth. But just looking at the aesthetics of this stuff growing up is really impactful. So this is just proving that I actually play.
Have a sound.
Yes. I made you watch jazz videos with no sound. What the heck? That's crazy. Sorry. All right, we'll continue.
Some stuff.
This is why this is improvisation. You just got to figure it out. All right, so can hear. All right, we'll start to get into the design stuff now. We got the music out of the way. So now I'm going to talk about thinking about identity beyond the typical sense of graphic design identity. I'm showing you a crazy zebra and whatever. You're like, why am I even sharing this? But I'm sort of thinking about that as an analogy to what creates identity in something. So a zebra is a very specific looking animal in this very specific part of Africa. It's all based on these conditions of evolution and nature coming together to create something. So just thinking about that allows me to look at this from a very holistic perspective of why this even is to begin with. It isn't just typeface, colors, fonts, etc. to make something. There's more to the story to this thing. So, if I start to think about this concept of identity in a much grander scale outside of the typical, graphic design, like history or, for example, or your classroom, then looking at other ways to create identity. So this idea of kinetic identity is something that the studios really kind of coined in the last 5 to 6 years. It's looking at movement as the identifier to something that moves. So, for example, if you saw me walking down the street, I'll definitely walk differently than my wife or my friends. That you would know if you got to know me well that I have my certain strut, and everybody has that because of how our biomechanics are set up within our body. So if you start breaking that down from a movement standpoint, just from the very standard physics, like looking at, gravity, magnetism, all these different things. Like we know if we look at these things, what bouncy balls do visually. So outside of the bouncy ball, we know what a bouncy ball is going to do. It's very natural to see this kind of movement in nature. Think about magnetism. We know, we understand these things very straightforward. If we see this stuff move, we know that's magnetism doing that. So if you look at these things from like trigonometry or code, we can definitely create these same kind of behaviors and animation and generate things that are very familiar from an animation standpoint using graphic design elements. So for example, if we take these, just applying a gravitational aesthetic or a gravitational programmation or whatever into this, you can already feel that there's something natural about this, but we're using design elements. So this becomes an area of exploration just to see, You know, what's typography plus magnetism? What's typography plus gravity? What happens? And these questions. So these are early tests. I think almost they're getting old now to look at, but I think it's really relevant to look at this idea of connecting things outside of the design realm to influence the design from a practical standpoint, from movement. So this keeps layering up. Like we start to think past physics. I mean, there's a ton more stuff I could show there. Then you have biomechanical systems. You know, constructs or character rigs. All of these things are really interesting to set up. And you look at animals, for example, have their ways of moving that we could be inspired by. So this little clip, this is Edward Muybridge. You see this loop of verse. And this is really quite inspiring to me, just to look at a sequence of images creating an animated piece, especially from, say, a generative system or even like a series of posters. You have this sequence that moves. And then if I look at this sequence, each still actually becomes its own composition within a system that becomes identifiable. But each still, they're also quite dynamic and different. So there's this consistency but flexibility that starts to come through by utilizing motion to develop something. And seeing this stuff, I think, so if I get rid of the horse, but I update this with, say, typography or graphic elements, but use these kind of looping systems, you can develop some really rich content with it, which I'll get into that in a little bit. Like I said earlier, we can put, you know, create code, create different formulas to develop these movements. You know, just looking at sequences from like a design language are really fascinating to me. You see this kind of visual language there, but this kind of flexibility, dynamism, but also this kind of consistent thing that comes through. Even looking at a lot of like science images from like a graphic design standpoint, you see these patterns, see these like different shapes and forms that come out of it that are quite beautiful. So taking the same mentality as I was showing with the physics, we're taking material from biomechanics and nature, and then applying that to graphic design elements. So you see this movement of the caterpillar's legs. But I think that the key here is we're starting to look at natural objects or nature as a point of reference for animation, that there's a certain elegance and a quality to the motion that becomes familiar and nice. It's not mechanical, you know, like a synthesizer or a computer. It's very, you see this kind of elegant quality coming through, and that kind of speaks to the natural component. So I'm adding more layers here. Now humans can be creative with these things. This is where my music background comes into play here. So we start to think about biomechanics, movement, physics, all this stuff, plus human creativity applied to music. So then rhythm and choreography play a huge part. So for example, I'm listening to like 90s trance music, then you have liquid dance. You see how the dancer's got its own style in relationship to the music. This is second line dancing. This is from New Orleans, very improvisational dance style related to a rhythmic pattern. And then listening to the Jabberwockies and watching them perform, sync up to the music is exactly this kind of idea that I'm trying to explore from a design standpoint. So listen to them sync up really tight. And I think on top of that, we start to look at, you know, how this kind of comes together. And I was talking about the Edward Muybridge sequence. So if you look at performance, just like the jazz musicians earlier, they're performing in the moment, in time, totally focused. Then you have movement and form coming together. So there's this beautiful quality within the movement of the dancer. But if I were to put these and hold them as static images, there's also a quality in the image that's always really impactful and powerful because the performance is so focused and so beautiful there. So there's this balance in between static and moving images that can be drawn out of a sense of looping motion or motion in a way that becomes quite intense, has a lot of intention to it. So, you know, I take a step back and look at a lot of references. You look at how music notation for ballet comes through, and just looking through a lens as a graphic designer, and I look at this system here, and it's really beautiful, like illustrative things, but you see there's like a systematic quality within all this stuff. And this is just the limitations of the body in relationship to, you know, rhythm and music and, you know, harmony and melody, but there's a language and a structure there that I find really attractive. And just seeing these things from a design perspective, I think are quite inspirational. And like I could see the thing on the right, this kind of reduction of the body system could be a way to explore typography, for an example. And you get this really kind of dynamic quality within the movement and forms and shape, which I find is, you know, really interesting from a design standpoint. There's some pieces by William Forsythe. There's a lot of research on how the body develops structure and informs stance. This is just some different sequences and different other references that I think are really interesting. Even like futurist work, capturing time in a very irreverent way. You see this like tension and motion in the work, even in a static form. Looking at how you could represent music in an artistic way. This is a piece by John Tejere, taking a Bach score and converting it into a piece of artwork. So there's systematic quality to it. And I quite like images that are caught with that dynamism and caught in time, because you get this like crazy energy within the image that feels unresolved, but also can only be done in a way that it's captured in time. It can't be constructed or composed by hand. It has to be captured. Just some few other examples of this. So take that all together. You take the b-boy doing the dance, and then you put type on it. That kind of sums it up. So you're just looking at typography, graphic design elements, as if they are just dancers in a dance group or choreograph. So this is really the summation of the entire process that we're looking at. We're looking at turning visual elements, turning typographic elements into, as if I'm choreographing dance, or I'm developing a composition or a loop or beats. So all these are really constructed, all these animations that I'm sharing here are constructed in a way that are no different than if I was just making beats using Ableton and Live, but instead of using music and rhythm, converting, keyframes and design elements with the same mentality as if I'm composing music. And here's some more examples. You always see this really rhythmic quality to it. We're playing with time signatures and rhythmic structures to develop all these animations. This is all very sequenced in a way. So it mimics how I would be creating and developing music, really. And that really is just an extension of how I look at, take my music background and apply that through a lens of graphic design. And that's how it comes together in this kind of format. And then even from there, we've developed a process where we're utilizing animation, and so it kind of helps us create things in a much generative design way. So even something that is animated, the result could actually just be a huge static print. But the only way that we could do something like this and to build that dynamic quality within the work is through this process of animation. So it's just capturing that moment rather than constructing it. So for example, you'll see how these projects develop, but like this thing on the left, this animation with this kind of wormy typography was a system that we created, and then we could update the titles, update the colors, update the composition. So then we had this very consistent visual system that was in motion. But that was the first thing, and then that was the last thing that was done was the printed thing. So it's almost the opposite of what you would typically do, where you would make a poster and try to do some stuff with it. But here we're thinking about the generative system first to then move out into the other objects. So which leads us to where we are today with communication technology. Everything's here, Instagram, whatever, TikTok. I don't like TikTok. I'm just gonna put that out there. But this is like the space that marketing communication is, specifically in the United States. This is sort of from Minority Report, which is like 25 years old now, but this is essentially where we are. You have pop-up windows of banner ads telling you exactly what you just bought yesterday and stuff. But how do we take advantage of these new ways that design is being displayed? So we can't look at things from like a traditional standpoint totally. Like a poster, for example, or a book are really good for the lineage of learning design, but may not actually function in the context of where the work is living now. So thinking about how the technology is impacting the work is going to affect how we actually design ultimately. And we're in an interesting time because there is no roadmap or history book or anything to teach us how to design for spaces outside of these frameworks. We're in 360 VR spaces or whatever that's going to be. We don't have fixed formats to apply to. So we have to think about typography and design through a way of just testing and learning and, taking from history and applying it to these new contexts. So this is kind of adjacent to understanding how the music's impacted the work. We're thinking about, the technology that's improving too. So then, what can we do with the new tech, applying some of the same kind of theoretical principles that I shared earlier and mixing them. So these are just prototypes of assuming that we're going to be able to track type on my face. Well, come 4 years later, we can do that. That's already like applications you can put in Instagram and already do it. So these things actually exist now. And this was all stuff that was done to prototype, to speculate what could be, like a dumpster with crazy type on it, 360 posters on the phone. Your face becomes an object for putting graphic design elements or typography. My dog's face becomes a place to put typography. It becomes like this totally experimental world of playing with graphic design in new spaces. So you're trying to take stuff that maybe you picked up in a book about Mueller-Brockman, but applying that into space where you're totally outside of the realm of what that traditional will teach you. So you're, kind of evolving the history with the work, using the tech. And that's always been the case within graphic design. New printing techniques get developed, so new ways that typography gets done. So it's always been this back and forth between technology and creativity pushing the field further. So it's important for us to definitely experiment and try new things to see what we can do. So which leads me to another very interesting point, is because we're limited with the technology, we're limited with the tools, we're limited with the software that we can do. A lot of the stuff I shared you can't necessarily do, at least straight out of like Photoshop, Illustrator. InDesign can't do that. So we're using, 3D tools, visual effects tools, animation software to prototype that stuff. But even there, it's just a prototype of what that's going to be. So how do you make stuff like this in this new technology? Because we don't have the actual software to do it. You have to work with developers and coders and develop your own stuff, essentially. So if I go back to music, the piano has really been the same keys for the last 2,000-3,000 years. It was an organ. I guess I'm going to totally kind of discard the people got tired of the organ. So then the harpsichord was developed. So thinking about the artistic quality is evolving the tool. So harpsichord displays a single volume. So then a piano was developed to be able to play expressive, soft, loud, with more dynamic quality. So then the tool needs to evolve with the artistic ability of who's interested in it. Then we have technologies, we have synthesizers. So you can do all kinds of stuff, still with the keys. And now we're in complete hardware, just hitting like beats and spinning records. We can develop music. And just on our computer now, we can do the same, we can create the same amount of musical quality just by sitting on the computer and developing something like that. So, in music's really been interesting because there has been more democratic on the tools you could use. There's all kinds of ways you can develop beats and tools and different systems, keyboards, synthesizers, all this stuff. But ultimately, as a designer, we're trapped really in, maybe Maxon Cinema 4D or Adobe or Figma. We're still only within these limited areas of large design corporations that kind of give us these options. But I think the thinking is now, well, what can we do if we develop our own tools? This is a sketch that I tried to do a while ago, just some typographic thing in open frameworks, but at least like testing out, like, can we create our own new design tools to do stuff? So this is a piece we did for Squarespace a while ago, just generating really expressive typography. And here's a project I'm just going to briefly talk about that we created an actual piece of software that was the delivery on the project versus actually, like a printed poster. It was the tool itself was actually the design brief rather than the actual export. So what this does, and I'm not going to give you too much background, but basically, rather than just having something, some rendered typography, this tool was something that we gave to the client to then generate, a limitless amount of content within like a range of expression, black and white, Helvetica, these options. You could put an image behind it. We're playing with space, so this like spatial quality, this repetition, these kind of design thematic things were baked into the software. So there was consistency there, but there's also this kind of plenty of expression that comes through the ability to affect and change the software. So input of text, the amount of repetitions, the camera work, you could even set keyframes and build your own animations in the software too. So this is thinking about, the design process is not thinking about the final production, but creating the tool for it in a way. So this is really kind of back to what I was saying about music needing to evolve. As a designer, now starting to think about developing tools and just looking at the final piece. And here's some exports from that project here. And like, this is crazy. Like we could technically do these in like Cinema 4D or After Effects, but they would take a while. Like this render to set up may take a full day just to do one. But within the software, it takes less than 10 or 15 seconds to get this done. So you could do like hundreds of these within like an afternoon. So the efficiency starts to speed up the process of what you could do, and then allows you to do stuff that's more elaborate and much wilder and much crazier than we could do in existing software and limitations there. And then you can also, what I didn't say, you could change the ratio. It could be tall format, square, 16:9. Just immediately just type in the ratio that you wanted, and it would just build a responsive composition to export to what that would be. So a lot of interesting possibilities in looking at developing tools to do the design work for you, but ultimately it still requires the ability to develop that and prototype the potential of this too. So our background in animation and visual effects allowed us to prototype and develop this tool to then build it. So it's not something you can just get in creative code and make. It does require a bit of a different process, but ultimately it's still creative direction and design development to get us here. And here's like a series of outputs from this. All right, so if you were with us last year, I'm going to go through this quickly, but there's a counterpoint to all this crazy stuff, all the crazy tech stuff. And I think this is important to talk about this from my kind of view as a designer. And I think me doing type design for the last 10 years has taught me a different relationship with graphic design than the tech stuff that I've shared. So as an output, kind of parallel to the design studio, there's a type foundry that runs parallel to it. And for me, just to look at these typefaces as areas for me to look at craftsmanship and graphic design and details and, you know, form and shape at a micro level, looking at that stuff, you know, really the classic training, you know, how we train our eyes to be responsive to compositions and stuff. Me working on type design has helped me develop that craft at a higher level. And I think what's nice about it is it's one of these, like, humbling for anybody in the audience that is drawing typefaces. They know it's like a long-term thing. Like, it's going to take you years to get a typeface that you feel comfortable with using and getting the craftsmanship there. So it forces you to work slowly, methodically, almost meditatively on these forms and shapes. And, you know, also it's very humbling because, you know, you think you've done a good job, say on the lowercase a or an S or one of these shapes that are difficult. Even like, I think diagonals are tricky to find, like that, you know, kind of optical thickness. And then you wake up, you think you did a good job one day, you wake up the next day and you're like, no, I didn't do good. And that goes on the cycle for like years and years and years until you're like, all right, I'm done with that font. Let's just be finished and go to the next thing. But it's, you know, it's the slow design versus the fast tech stuff. And sort of this combination of the two things has really, I think, helped inform a lot of the taste and a lot of the, you know, the kind of the decisions that go into the process of what the DIA work is doing, because you see that there definitely is a very intense focus on typographic from a classical sense that goes into the work that we're creating from a very technical sense. So the two really have to come together, because I think if they don't do that, say if we're just tech forward doing all this crazy stuff, the work will not have the lasting capability. It doesn't come from a strong, steep graphic design tradition or a piece of history. So just is like tech on tech, it's going to be cheesy, looks like a screensaver. And we need to be very careful with that because, you know, graphic design history and typographic history are pretty long things. Like type forms and type are slow to evolve. They're related to a lot of, you know, cultural things. And I think we need to be very sensitive to that and understand that relationship to design history and typographic history to be able to make very strong informed decisions as we're making radical technical design things. And then ultimately, you know, this has been a nice place for me to learn and study and get this out, you know, and create actually commercially ready typefaces in parallel to the work that's going on with DIA. And also what's really fun about that is this becomes a place to explore new techniques and test out new technologies and stuff that aren't client related to DIA, so there's no risk really. It's just having a lot of fun and seeing what we could do with the typefaces and you know, just playing with new techniques that we could maybe apply on a larger scale. Here's some more examples of this. It's like 3D, 2D things, like, you know, just seeing, you know, really kind of pushing what the type specimen would be. So then this is kind of that two worlds. It's like, you know, having created the typeface, then you're doing the radical thing with the typeface. So it's like this all encompassing space to kind of have a lot of fun with your own material. So it's like a really nice liberating space to have in parallel to the studio, because none of this I have to worry about clients. It's like, just make some fun stuff today with cool fonts. It's like, that's simple. So yeah, these are all available kind of by email now if you want to check that out. All right, so brief intermission. So now all this stuff comes together and we have the output.
Top down. Roll up with the top down. See me wrong with the top down. Top down through the streets here. You think she ain't on a leash here? Baby, you know what it is. Know you a sleeper, but you know they love a creeper. Don't be shy with your features.
There you have it, a little sequence of our work over the last few years. So I want to talk about two specific projects that kind of really outline all of the stuff that I shared on the input. And I think that really kind of show the full breadth of what the studio is working on through all the different skills. And I think two of my favorite projects too, and I think that's probably because they take advantage of a lot of the stuff that we do. The first one I want to share is Viral. It was the visual identity for the Biennale de Graphic Design in Chaumont. This was last year. And the topic was viral during COVID, complicated, but I think that forced us to find some humor and find something interesting in that. So if we look at Viral from a content standpoint, kind of give you a window on how we think conceptually about projects. You know, what's the core of this? Like, we're trying to find a very simple idea that we can execute on. So we have viral images, you know, this stuff that we see and share on the internet. And obviously there's virality in viral images. So these two things became kind of the source material to develop an idea graphically from that. And then on top of that, we had to look at maybe how do we look at typographic things within the virality. So we looked at meme typography, this kind of like just bad typography, essentially, you know, what is that? And then we're trying to find a highbrow kind of take on it. If we look at some stuff by Weingart, it's kind of the same mentality through the lens of graphic design. But so we have this typographic thing, the dissemination of virality, and then the viral content. So these three things come together and fold into the full system for us to then look at. So as we started this project, you know, this gets back into this idea of improvisation, just making stuff. So this is just us looking at how we can develop a typographic system. We're just using a poster layout for the sake of developing, you know, how we're going to systematically find the end result of how we're going to use type. So we're just playing around. This is just every 5 minutes, new poster, new poster, new poster. Just get posters out, just make stuff. And just looking at this, the elements, the shapes, like what are we doing here? You know, what's coming out of this that we can withdraw something systematic that can stretch over animations, different poster formats, books, all the different parts of the visual identity to keep that quality in there. So as we're going through this is where we ended up. And you're probably like, why? You know, this like, it does look really weird. It's like not quite the right amount of relationship between scales. It's weird. You have uppercase, lowercase, but we're going back to, okay, it's viral. You know, it needs to have this kind of irreverent quality, but done deliberately. You know, we're obviously graphic designers. So we have a reason why we did this. So it looks a little off, but this is nothing yet. So this starts to give us a foundation of how we're going to treat typography in the rest of the system itself. So type's done. We have this idea. Now we're looking at virality. So how can we have these images kind of cross over the type? This is looking at more generative capabilities of using text, just playing with, possibilities of this kind of image-based system, and how could that work, and integrate those two. So ultimately, we ended up licensing a series of viral images and also putting a few images of the studio within there as Easter eggs. But so we were able to use these images, and this became the content for everything all the visual content that comes through. So from there, we start to mix this together. We develop a system that then we can create this viral, like kind of takeover of typography with that images. So they're coming together into one. This is all coded and developed directly in After Effects. And then, from there, we're able to build exports and animations from the system. So then you can see like Baby Yoda coming out and the weird old man grinning face coming out. But as you look from a distance, you can't really tell that that was there. So the idea is that, at a closer look, realize how ridiculous the content is. It is viral content within a viral thing. So it's really stacking on viral. So this is the avatar. So you have like Baby Yoda, this angry baby, it's funny, just the content in there. This was actually the images that we use for the visual identity. And with this system, just like the stuff I was sharing earlier, we can export all this stuff since we have it built. So this is just really quick exports of different layouts, different typographic things, different pieces. We built a kaleidoscope version of it that could be exported. And also because this is set up in a way that these were treated as particles. So we could change the particles rather than them being our images and the viral images. It was for a poster exhibition too. So we updated it with posters, and then we were exporting the same system using different content. So you get really colorful, different quality, because those are actually posters in the exhibition within the system itself. And then here's some other different exports that came out of it. So what we're doing here is just selecting moments of time within the system to then be the actual poster or print. So these aren't hand placed. This is all just, oh, that one's good. I like this composition, print. I like this composition, print. This composition, print. You just go through the timeline. That composition is good, print. So none of these are done by like a tradition. I'm not in InDesign, moving this stuff around. This is literally just exported directly from the sequence. And we're just trying to find compositions that we felt were had a lot of tension. And as you can see here, you see how that typographic system comes to life. Then you have the kerning messed up. Then you have the sizing messed up, uppercase, lowercase, mix. It's actually terrifying and ugly in a way, but it's really intentional to really get this energy to come through in the work. And also, say if I look at this, for example, this is just the animation. I can just pause. That could be a poster. This could be a poster. This could be a poster. I think you get the gist. So we're just basically using time to create form and form to create time. And what's great about this, these are so quick. We could just export, make new stuff quickly. Different animations, just really fast and really efficient, but you get this crazy dynamic system that's coming through. So that was really, really exciting. And then a tricky part of this project is that we had to create an actual piece of catalog for all the exhibition, and there's essays and stuff. So this is the export for the cover. You can kind of see viral on the top right of the images here. And then we had to develop a typographic language that would mimic this same feeling, but also be functional within an editorial context. So, a lot of trial and error, getting the same kind of tension within the typography, within the book itself. And then we're looking at the captioning to be really interesting too. So actually on the left and right, if you were to thumb through the book like an animation, like a paper animation, you would see the animation change within the right and left. So there's the placement of the captions on the side of the pages always adjust and change depending on where the grid is. You can see here how it shifts. So you have the same quality that we're doing with animation within a very kind of technical typographic system within the edition design. And here's some examples of the output. These are the posters. This is in Chaumont, France. It's a very funny small town in France. So, and it's not really a creative city. So every 2 years, all of a sudden designers descend on this small town. And I'm sure the locals are what on earth is this poster? That's huge poster that's sitting in the middle of town, and people are what, this is crazy. But it's just fun to see just the scale of this and how this could come to life. So you see that, having the system set up, we could do posters, animations, interactive pieces, all different scales and ratios really quickly. And then if you zoom in quick, you can see like Baby Yoda and stuff floating around in the poster. So, and then we had to do some stuff that was, you know, just like two-tone. So we exported this as just black and white stuff too, to create an additional layer to the visual identity as well. And this is just different aspects of the design. Sticker, here's some of the final book. So that's viral. The last project I want to talk about, it's an oldie but a goodie, is the visual identity for Squarespace. That was done in 2018. Ongoing, because there's been several projects that have been added to this over the years. And I think reason why I say ongoing, and this is one thing I talk about in brand design specifically, there's a tendency to sort of launch the rebrand and put all this like press out, like, hey, check out this rebrand. And then like 2 or 3 years later, it gets rebranded again, something different. Because the way I look at corporate brand design is that it's a long-term game. You know, if you create a system that's going to last, you know, 5, 10, 15, 30 years on, that's the way we need to think about these things. We can't look at them as like marketing campaigns or trendy pieces. We have to look at sort of structural elements. And I think what Squarespace has done and has achieved has maintained the consistency of the launch of this project, and then it's evolved since then in a very clear way and consistent way with and even without our involvement. And I think that's an important thing to say, to look at from a design standpoint. I would say, like, if you did like an award show for branding, you should wait 5 years after the release of the branding to give it an award to see if it even exists. So anyway, all right, so I'm going to get into this, looking at Squarespace. It's a little preview of, this is how you like sell work during a presentation, but this gives you like a overall idea of what it's about. Have it. It's just Squarespace. That's it. Just like viral, it's just viral images and viral. That's it. So you'll see a common theme in like the concepts in the studio. They're really simple, really clear, really direct ideas. But what's interesting for us about these ideas is the flexibility and the expansion you can pull out of something that's really simple. So before I get into the kind of the formal aspects of this, if I look at this from a strategic aspect, we had to come up with the aesthetics, come up with the typeface, come up with all these elements of why it looks the way it looks. So, you know, talking to them, we worked with just a creative director, the CEO, and one other, the chief creative officer. It was just 3 people really that we involved in the whole project. And we had a lot of discussions of like, what is Squarespace in comparison to the competition? You know, looking at tech brands over the US. And you think about tech brands, it's like Facebook, Google, West Coast, everything's like happy and nice and fun, but they're like, no, we're New York. We're like New York. So what's New York? You know, we look at New York modernism, and I call it like wealthy modernism. You think the Seagram building by Mies van der Rohe, it's like marble, Barcelona chairs, just like modernism architecture with a lot of cash. And then you look at the Vignelli subway system. So there's a rich typographic history that we could draw from here, both in the type design and the typography of the project. So looking at Helvetica, kind of messed up by how it was printed throughout the city to develop ultimately the typeface that was done for the project. And then internally, both the interior of the Squarespace office feels like I'm going to a fashion show / high-end hotel / tech company. So there's this feeling of New York fashion, black and white, helmet laying, Alexander Wang, this kind of like, and also like half the creative team dresses like this too. So we're just looking at how people behave internally and seeing if there's aesthetic cues we can draw from into the work. This is the lobby at the headquarters in Tribeca. So this is exactly what I'm saying. Like already in the architecture of this company, the offices, there's already an energy, there's already a vibe, they're already doing something that feels interesting, that could be translated into a corporate identity, which was surprising at this point that hadn't been done. So, you know, we start looking at like, okay, so first things first, to get a visual identity to become consistent, looking at the basic typographic things is the one way to do it. People argue with me. To me, it is the most important thing. The typeface selection, how the typeface is handled across the board, is going to be the thing that's used the most in all corporate identity work. So, creating an atmosphere within the type design and how that's going to be treated is going to do the work, and it's going to speak the most. I mean, on top of course, you're going to have art direction, the marketing campaigns, but from product design, forms, all this stuff, the typeface is there. So we developed a typeface working with Francois Rappo and Optimo Foundry to kind of, take inspiration from the subway system, this very much grotesque Helvetica accidents route, but also find a way to bring in this fashionable quality to it and bring in this tech quality to it. There's three things coming together. This is some of the initial drafts for the typeface. It's also fun when you're working with somebody like Francois. He's almost in his late 60s. He lives in the mountains, actually not too far from, it's like in the middle of the mountains in Switzerland by himself, just drawing typefaces. So he's like the quintessential Swiss type designer doing, grotesque typefaces. So he's like the person that we, in my opinion, was the only person on earth that I think could do this project to really get this right aesthetic down. So ultimately, to get the typeface design was really the mixture of those three things. And then we start to look at the typesetting and how that can be kind of referential to the New York system. So there is definitely this nod to New Yorkness, but also it has those other kind of strategic qualities to it as well. And then looking at even all caps, opening up the proportions a little bit, is a little more geometric in its quality. It has sort of a fashionable tech quality to it in these different type settings. So there's definitely playing with the potential of how this could be worked and used. And really from there, I mean, from my opinion, once a typeface is set and you're feeling good about it, that does the work. Like everything else is easy after this. I mean, theoretically. So this is the logo type, but so now we get to play with it. So we have really great source material. We have really great typeface to work with. So now we're playing with Squarespace. So this is just Squarespace playing around with posters. And this is that improv again, like I was saying, just making stuff. So then the Squarespace idea comes out, just making stuff. We don't know what this is. This is just having fun with elements, seeing what we could do, seeing if there's a system that can be drawn out of this, just exploring. Just this is what we do. We just like hundreds of animations, like hundreds of posters, just making stuff. And it's just like I'm playing jazz, like, it's almost like every 30 seconds, make a new one, make a new one. What if you do this? Make a new one, make a new one, make a new one. So then you like folder of your work by the end of the day. It's like hundreds of little variations and options and stuff that allows you to like just explore the possibilities of these ideas. And what's nice about that is that it basically becomes reference material for how you create from there. You have created all of these things, and then you can look at it objectively and find the few things in there that are actually interesting, that have potential to grow into something a bit larger. So we're going back and forth from static to motion, just playing with this stuff. And ultimately, it's time to boil these down into, very specific things that we need to create a system out of. So I think internally, we know this is possible, but then, even sharing this with the Squarespace team, what we could do with this, and how could this develop into something. So we got the typeface finished. We created a specific cut for the user interface. And I don't want to stress this, and I have to stress this like over the top, like to do proper tech branding, the typeface should work in the product and also in the marketing. So this is my opinion, of course, but here's the thing. If I have marketing materials that are saying something on a billboard, and then I go to the product design and it feels like a totally different experience, to me, that's a total disconnect from a branding perspective. So to look at typography and the craftsmanship of typography within a tech product has to be done at like the highest quality. It has to be hinted, it has to be mastered, the forms have to be worked out to the highest quality to be able to perform in these tasks like buttons and back end and working all the screens. And I think people do forget that there is a technical aspect to type design that needs to be thought of as I'm selecting typefaces or developing typefaces for projects like this. I can't just like pick something I think is cool and expect it to work, because it's not going to. So not be selling that type's important, because obviously this is a type-driven conference, but it is very important. So going back to the animation, we developed a series of behaviors that then we could apply to different components of this. So we have this kind of Hubert thing in the middle with the grid. You have kind of framing devices, transition devices, different states that then we can apply content into. And then we can develop stuff out of these. So here's the brand film. Oh, this is just like the loader. Here's the brand film. I'm going to fly through this a little bit, and I'm just going to go through some of the assets. But then so you have the front side design. You see how the type comes to life. Some of the transitions you see using the shape, the framing devices of the square, and you can create these really expressive things. So we created actually a series of tools generated directly. We used Cinema 4D as one. We had custom tools done and stuff in After Effects. We had a whole suite of different stuff that we're able to create different objects with. This is within the lobby. That was during the launch of the campaign. We had these huge prints. So as you can see, Square in Space, a lot of possibilities. You can do all kinds of radical things, simple things, but also the typeface holding the thread together aesthetically. So you can do a lot of different stuff, play with a lot of different possibilities, but it still feels consistent just by that reduction to even limiting to one way. I think we use medium through everything. So then there's this one consistent thread that pulls it all together. Even looking at the product design, you have this quality and atmosphere that feels very much derived from the type design itself. Even developing custom tools within there. So like this is everything going on. You have motion tools, typeface, the whole system, and then some basically. So this really shows like the whole breadth of the kind of the different skills of the studio come together. And then this was almost a year and a half ago, they went public on New York Stock Exchange. So I think maybe I'm not right about this, but I think this has been the most radical typography that's ever seen the New York Stock Exchange screens. So these crazy like type animations going on in the background. And also we took over the Times Square with this. So you have like, massive screens with radical type going. It was kind of like a pleasure as a graphic designer to be able to like, have a client, let us do this, and, kind of get away with something that would be quite experimental typically, but actually on a really, really corporate scale. So this is kind of like doing that. It's like, when would you ever be able to like thrash type on a screen like this? So I don't think in the rest of my career, I don't think I'll ever be able to get this opportunity again. So put that in there. All right, so I'm going to wrap this up. We have a few minutes left, but kinetic identity, concepts that relate to passage of time. You see this always combination between, form, time, form coming together. Looking at time to be a potential thing that can create something, and playing with that. You can see my music background and all those different references coming into that as well. And then looking at how like using animation and using computation, whether it's coding or just, looping an animation is a great way to start thinking about kind of a generative system or a kinetic system. So this is the way things have been taught, still animation interaction. This is the way we go at it. Like, okay, breakdancer. Let's start with the breakdancer. Then we'll put type on the breakdancer. Or let's think about physics. All the inputs can be anything, really. Thinking about the big picture, how it influences the work, and applying what we know about type or design into that. I'm gonna just fly through this. So I've been teaching in Europe for the last 4 years. Here's an example.
So for me,
I'm just gonna let him play this.
And movement would be like.
So what I'm doing here is, if I have a drawing that has a shape, if I hold the shape up, what does it sound like? And what does it sound like? How does it move? So there's these three things: movement, sound, form coming together. And then if I have the sound, what's the shape? Or if I have the sound, how does it move? If I have the movement, how does it sound? What does the movement make the shape? So there becomes this kind of connectivity to the body in relationship to form and movement that is definitely prevalent in a lot of the work that I showed you. And this is a way to get the students involved in this process as well. This is kind of fun, actually. Play this.
This is like, whoop.
And then here's some examples, some different workshops over the years, exploring a lot of these same concepts and doing some crazy stuff. All throwing stuff on floors. This is like a typeface thing we did at ACAL Master type Design, looking at specimens. Some fun stuff there using screens. And then just to finish this up, this idea of being a beginner, going back to Wayne Shorter, always learning something new, always pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. Like if I'm, like just being in this kind of state of excitement to try something and not being afraid of sucking at it. And I think that's actually what type design taught me. You're always going to be kind of not good at it for a long time. So you just have to like find ways to make it fun, exciting, bit by bit, day by day, year by year. You keep going. And then eventually you're like, whoa, I can actually do this stuff. You shouldn't have this pressure that I should be good or bad. It's just having fun with it and trying new things all the time. And that's what I always say, that people like, because creative block, people talk about creative block a lot. And I think creative block doesn't exist if you're willing to put yourself in a situation of uncomfort or the unknown or not knowing. So what that means is just opening a tutorial on YouTube, like how to animate fire. And there's a guy from like 16-year-old guy from Germany telling you to animate fire. And then you put typography in there, and then all of a sudden you have something, new ideas. Just gonna pop through this because a few more minutes. So to finish things up, improvisation. If you're in that space, if you really can find that space just to create and be in the flow, all this stuff disappears. You're not criticizing, you're not comparing the work, you're not expecting the work, you're not scared to try something, you're not being self-conscious or worried about what people think about it. So this idea to find a space that allows you just to freely make stuff. And I talk about this thing where you have a voice in your head that says, what if, not like, change this, change that, I don't know. It's like, what if? It's like, if I'm making a poster, like, hey, what if you try a different font? What if you make it bigger? What if you make the color red? What if you make the color green? So this suggestion in your ear. And then what you do, save as, new suggestion, save as, new suggestion, save as. So what if? And to me, that's improvisation in a design sense, being able to catalog that creative process live. And then you are able to create stuff that you would never have done if you're like, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. I don't know. Just have this positive feedback within the work as you're creating stuff. And to finish the presentation, I'm going to move it over to Wayne Shorter and John Baptiste to kind of sum everything up for me in a better way than I could ever do.
What are you trying to relate to them, that feeling? What's your intent?
Well, actually, the intent now is to throw away and kind of put away everything that was learned, the studied stuff. Again, I always refer, because Miles is the only one that would talk like this. He'd say, Wayne, he said, hey, Wayne, do you ever feel like you want to play, he said, you want to play like you don't know how to play? And then he said, do you feel like you'd like to play music that doesn't sound like music? That doesn't sound, I know it's
right.
Familiar. And I have a tape of Charlie Parker giving a lesson, and the student says, Mr. Parker, I have to learn all these scales, memorize all these scales? And Bird said, yes, and after you finish learning them, forget them.
Right. Play as if you don't know all of that stuff, or you're not playing a scale, but you're playing straight from the heart.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thank you very much. I know you have a lot of great talks to listen to today, but hopefully that was a good morning kickoff.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mitch, and thank you for having us, and thank you for sharing all this mind-blowing knowledge that you are crafting with your team. And I have to say goodbye because of our schedule, but really thank you so much. I appreciate it. And see you in the future.
All right, take care.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.